So just so everyone knows, the recording has started, and we'll start the session proper in about 4 minutes to give people time to join in. Just to anyone who may have just joined, thank you for joining. We'll start the session proper in just a few minutes. We're giving a couple minutes for everyone who's registered to pop in. So if you need to grab a tea real quick or a drink, by all means. We're hoping to start in about 2 minutes. I think we're about ready to start. I haven't seen anyone join in a little bit. So Kelly, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, of course. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the GW4 Open Research Prize Awards event. Great to have everyone here. I'm Kelly Snow from Cardiff University Library Service and lead for this year's GW4 Open Research Week Planning Committee. So I'm here to just give you a few housekeeping points before we start. So the session is being recorded and will be available on the GW4 YouTube channel in due course. In terms of agenda for today, we're split into two halves effectively. So shortly I will hand over for a welcome from Professor Dawn Knight, who will be chairing today's session, who is Cardiff University Dean of Research, Environment and Culture. We will then have some remarks from Melanie Nitch, for GW4 Director, before we move on to the keynote around the UKRN Open Research Survey. And there will be opportunity for some questions after the keynote. So if you have any questions, please pop those in the Q&A as we go along. We will then stop for a short break before we move into the second half of the session, where we'll see the prize finalist presentations and the award announcements. So without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Dawn Knight as chair of the session. Over to you, Dawn.
Thank you, and good afternoon from a very sunny Cardiff. It's also my pleasure to welcome everybody here today to the 2026 GW4 Open Research Prize. The GW4 Open Research Prize celebrates researchers who put openness at the heart of their work, making research more accessible, transparent, and reproducible. Established at the University of Bristol in 2021, the prize has expanded across the GW4 Alliance in 2023, and it kind of coincided with the first Open Research Week run by GW4 in that year. It's now a flagship initiative, and it champions a research culture that breaks down barriers and accelerates innovation and impact. This year's awards underline that open research matters at every single career stage. So we recognise both early career researchers and research enablers whose contributions are essential to making openness a reality. I'm really delighted that Cardiff University is hosting the awards today on behalf of GW4. And why, I guess, and in my role as Dean for Research, Environment and Culture, one of the kind of principal things that's central to my role is open research. Open research speaks directly to who we are as a research intensive at university. We're completely committed to producing knowledge that makes a real difference, not only in Wales, but across the UK and globally. Openness strengthens the quality, integrity and impact of our work. It builds trusts. It enables others to build on research as well. So above all, open research reflects our belief that knowledge is a shared and important public good. So this is why it's such an important thing to have. And that's the kind of context. And it's also my pleasure to introduce the kind of first segment of this day. The two kind of keynote talks. So the first one is from Melanie Netsch, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Melanie, who joins GW4 as the new director with a career shaped at the heart of UK research and innovation. She most recently served as Deputy Director of Impact and R&I Sustainability. She brings with her deep experience in strengthening the UK's research and innovation landscape, from championing financial resilience across the sector to evidencing the broad societal impacts of research. Melanie's led international funding initiatives supporting a range of different challenges and important major challenges, such as healthy ageing, next generation services. She's also helped to create the UK's first arts, humanities and social sciences commercialisation catalyst, something that we can all learn from, I think. Her track record shows a leader who not only understands the complexities of research systems, but who knows how to drive bold collaborative change. In her own words, if you don't mind me kind of quoting from you, Melanie, from 6 months ago, she was thrilled to be joining the GW4 Alliance at this crucial time, and sees this moment as an opportunity to grow our collaborations, amplify our collective strengths, and to tackle urgent global challenges. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Melanie Netsch, and I'll hand the floor to you.
Many thanks, Dawn. What a lovely, warm welcome indeed. And good afternoon, and thank you to everybody who's joined us for this year's GW4 Open Research Prize ceremony, held as part of our wider GW4 Open Research Week, as Dawn just outlined. As she said, this week unites our academic and professional services communities across the Alliance, which includes Bath, Bristol, Exeter and Cardiff universities, along with partners, collaborators and policymakers to explore and critically celebrate leading practice in open research. I'd like to begin by thanking our colleagues at Cardiff University who are leading the prize in Open Research Week, this year, and have done so with dedication and care. I'm also grateful to the Cross GW4 Organising Committee who have crafted an inspiring and ambitious programme for Open Research Week. Their work is fundamental to driving the openness and collaboration that we value so strongly. At GW4, open research is central to our developing strategic direction. As an alliance, we are committed to building a research environment that is open, responsible, sustainable, and collaborative. Openness strengthens the rigor, reproducibility, and transparency of our research. And actually, critically, it ensures that the knowledge we generate and the insights we have are accessible to the widest possible audiences. Open research aligns directly with our work to support people and talent, and importantly, directly maps onto our ambition to support GW4 research environments, the environments and the places that research takes place. It also supports the knowledge-intensive economy of the UK and our regions by helping insights and innovation flow equitably between researchers, partners, and communities. As Dawn has flagged, we have stepped into the GW4 director role in November, and we are now in the process of developing a new GW4 strategy, helping us to ensure that we can make the most impact using research and innovation between us. And central to our strategy is embedding open research principles. One of the strengths of the GW4 is that each of our universities bring a distinctive yet strongly aligned commitment to open research. I'm going to just give you some key highlights across the 4 institutions. So for example, Bath University has a webpage that showcases their approach to embedding open research into their institutional strategy. This includes the university's Open Research Action Plan and Research Culture Action Plan, 2 very key points that go together. Resources such as case studies and top tips for open research are available to everyone. And they also spotlight their open research group. It's a grassroots, postgraduate researcher-led group interested in making research more accessible, transparent, and rigorous. And Bath is also continuing to integrate open research criteria into recruitment and promotion. And there is a session tomorrow on this if you'd like to hear more about it. Bristol University also has a public statement and online support for staff and the community. Open and transparent research practices are a key pillar of their research culture and implementation plan. Activities focus on providing inclusive open research training opportunities and promoting and embedding open research policies through their open research working group. There are also activities underway to develop a co-production open research policy, improving research data storage practices with the Digital Research Infrastructure Board, and they develop a commitment and a roadmap for making openness the default for research information, enabling interoperable systems. I'm sure we would all appreciate that, and supporting sustainable infrastructures. Cardiff University is embedding open research across their institution, joined with their commitment to the responsible use of research metrics. And their webpage showcases their open research position statement, setting out their institutional principles. Recent developments at Cardiff in open research at a library level include working in partnership with the research services to establish a new centralized deposit service for their institutional publications repository, ORCA. This will enable the efficient and timely deposit of research outputs and reduces the administrative burden on academic staff, something I'm sure we can all celebrate. The new library service structure will also be implemented later this year that will allow for further active support in open research, including the expansion of advice, advocacy, and training offered to staff and students. And finally, at the University of Exeter, their webpage shows how open research spans across their open access commitment and sits within Exeter's wider research and impact strategy. This places it at the heart of an ethical, inclusive, and supportive research environment. And examples of their work include increasing support for community-led diamond initiatives through its institutional open research fund. And in November 2025, Exeter signed up to Quora, demonstrating their commitment in responsible research assessment, and an action plan is in development. If you want further information on any of these areas, I am sure colleagues across the GW4 Alliance would be very happy to connect with you, and please do check their websites, their web pages. Together, these institutional commitments demonstrate the shared ambition across GW4. Openness is not an optional extra. Instead, it is the foundation for excellent, responsible, and critically impactful research. Across the GW4 Alliance, all 4 universities are members of the UK Reproducibility Network, UKRN. And this is a national peer-led consortium committed to improving research quality, transparency, and reproducibility. We're going to hear a little bit more about this shortly. This collective membership strengthens our shared ambition to foster an open, rigorous, and responsible research culture. Through UKRN, our institutions collaborate with partners across the sector, access training and best practice resources, and contribute to national efforts to reform research culture. So today, this week, and today's session in particular, gives us the opportunity to highlight and celebrate some examples of excellent open research within our institutions. This year, I am delighted to introduce 3 new prize categories, reflecting our collective desire to recognize a broader and more inclusive range of contributions to open research. As Dawn highlighted, one is early career researchers, who are often pioneering innovative open practices. A new general category is open to any researcher or team whose work demonstrates impactful open research. And importantly, research enablers, who are the experts whose technical, professional, and supportive contributions make open research possible. These new categories allow us to celebrate the diversity of our community. Open research is sustained by many hands, many roles, and many pathways. And today we acknowledge that richness. I would like once again to thank Cardiff University for leading this year's prize delivery, and the entire GW4 Open Research Week Organizing Committee for their tremendous efforts in shaping a compelling and wide-ranging program. My thanks also go to the judges who faced the challenging task of reviewing a field of exceptional submissions, those who took the time to submit an entry to the prize, and to every researcher, technician, librarian, and professional colleague who work advances open research within our Alliance. On behalf of the GW4, thank you for your commitment to open research. I really very much look forward to hearing from the shortlisted applicants, and of course, congratulations to all our finalists and winners. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Very inspiring, actually. Thanks very much for setting the scene so clearly there. Okay, so it's now my pleasure to hand over to our next speakers, Lavinia Gambelli and Jackie Thompson from UKRN and University of Bristol. They'll be speaking to us about the UKRN Open Research Survey, but by way of introduction in terms of both the individuals. Lavinia is the Open Research Community Manager at the University of Bristol. With a research background in biology, she works closely with the library research support, Associate PVC for research environment and culture. I should get that right because I'm the same person here, and the UKRN local network to advance open research across the institution. She also serves as project manager for the UKRN Evaluation Design Project, contributing to national and international efforts to promote open research evaluation and more responsible approaches to research assessment. Jackie is an active researcher, so moving to Jackie, with a PhD in psychology and currently is conducting meta-research investigating responsible research practices. In her role as Open Research Lead at University of Oxford, she supports training, outreach and advocacy about open research practices to researchers across the university and is one of Oxford's representatives in the UKRN Open Research Programme. She recently organised the Oxford Forum of Open Scholarship, which was a one-week open research conference. Would you like me to introduce the survey, or will you embed that in your presentation? I can provide a very broad overview. Okay, I'll just do a very broad overview.
We'll introduce that, but go ahead if you want to do a high level.
Okay, I'll do the high level. Okay. How widely are open research practices? Well, practiced in the UK. The UKRN Open Research Survey provides a snapshot of open research practices across UK higher education institutions, examining practices such as data sharing, pre-registration, open code, open access publishing, and so on. The survey also reports researchers' attitudes, facilitators that improve open research uptake and trends in responses across career levels and disciplines. It's a really holistic piece. This data will support long-term progress towards more open and transparent research. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Dawn, and bear with us for a moment while we get the slides going and make sure that we can present them properly. Okay, let me just check if I'm sorry, we're trying a method where we're kind of sharing control over this, and
Just to know, while you're setting that up, if people have questions as we go through, do note them in the chat, and then we'll come back to them at the end. There'll be opportunities to ask questions, but also have discussion at the end.
Okay, brilliant. Just checking if this is working now. It worked just a moment ago. Okay, that's straight. I don't know why that's not working, but why don't we go ahead and I'll just Lavinia has the slides and she can advance them as I go. Yeah, very strange. Oops, let me try one more time. Oh. Oops. Okay, Lavinia, I'm gonna pass over to you because it looks like maybe I can advance them, but not the arrow buttons don't seem to be working. So
okay, let's try because I had yeah, I can do it.
Okay, go ahead. I'll leave that to you. Apologies, everyone. Believe it or not, we did practice this yesterday, but you never know what Teams is going to throw at you. So thank you again to Dawn for the lovely introduction. As she mentioned, we're both at the University of Bristol. I'm at the University of Oxford as well. And we both work quite heavily with UKRN, and we're very involved in running and analysing and writing up this survey. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So Dawn already gave, and Melanie gave an introduction to the UK Reproducibility Network, but just to mention again that this is, an amazing network across the UK with dozens of members, and the Open Research Programme in particular is, focused on improving training for open research and better understanding of the factors that can improve research quality, trustworthiness, and reproducibility. And this means that UKRN is in a great position to be able to get an overview of research and open research in institutions across the country. So it's not just a boring, fusty old, network with a bunch of, meetings and administrative stuff. We're really trying to do things that are on the cutting edge and really understand what's going on by increasing communication. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the survey aims now. And the survey itself. So why is it important that we can get a kind of overview of open research nationally? And of course, the answer is to make change. You have to kind of know what's going on in front of you. You have to, to navigate this sea. You have to be able to survey it and view it. So we conducted this survey in last year in 2025, and the primary focus was to understand just generally how aware are researchers of open research practices and how much do they use them? Because many of us working on this, we're in our own bubble. A secondary aim of the survey was also to measure some more about it. So, attitudes and some of those facilitators that can help make open research more possible for researchers. And I'll note that the survey wasn't aimed particularly at being able to inform what we should do in terms of training, but it does have quite a few bits that are relevant. And I know many of you today are probably interested in how it affects training. Okay, so moving along to the survey methods. I won't over-egg this, but just to say that really the unique selling point of this survey was its representativeness. So we had over 1,400 responses across UK institutions that are involved in the Open Research Program, which is really a wide variety of different types of institutions across the country. And importantly, we did this as a representative sample. So we sent invitations to select groups of researchers at universities that were stratified by their discipline and career stage to get a representative sample of the researchers at those universities. So it's, you can make fairly strong inferences about the frequencies that we're reporting here. And there's a pretty decent response rate as well. So hopefully it's not too biased, as these surveys sometimes can be, by just those who are interested in open research responding. We're getting a full range of views of people who have no opinions to strong opinions. Okay, so the survey had kind of 5 main sections to it. Essentially, we asked, we'll go through all this in detail later on, so don't worry. But I do want to highlight on the right there, you can see that we also, in the full report, analyzed the results overall, but also breaking them down by a few of the other things we measured. So breaking it down by research approach, qualitative versus quantitative, by some more detailed research methods. So you can see, what it is for people working in archival research, for instance. And we also broke it down by the various disciplines and by career level. So although we'll present the overview of the results today, there's more detail if you'd like to look at it in the full report, which we'll link at the end. Okay. So just quickly to tell you, who actually responded to our survey? As you can see here, there was about 1/5 of the respondents were qualitative researchers. A little over 1/3 were quantitative researchers, and then another significant chunk did both types of research. That was just very broadly defined. And then in terms of career level, you can see it was a pretty close to even split across those kind of junior, mid, and senior groups. Okay, and then looking at the disciplines, sorry, this might be a little small here, so don't worry about trying to read it all, but basically you can see that we covered, these are essentially pretty close to the disciplines you see in the kind of ref categories or HESA categories and other breakdowns. So you can see we had representation across all of these various disciplines, and it pretty closely tracks the numbers that you tend to see across the country. So you can see there's quite a few medical researchers, for example, and that mirrors the actual numbers in the wild. Okay. So getting down to the actual results, what did we find? This is the exciting part. So for each of these 14 open research practices, we asked whether respondents were aware of it on the left and how much they used it on the right. And you can see, apologies, it is a little bit small on there. So if you can't read them all, you can see that the awareness and use was in purple. So those who were aware, those who used it was in the purple. The green represents respondents that weren't aware or didn't use it. And then the gray is those who deemed it not applicable for them. So you can see in general, awareness was pretty high, except for a couple of practices, particularly pre-registration and FAIR data, the FAIR acronym, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And then you can see as well that awareness was quite a bit higher than use overall for most of these practices. So, and particularly for some like citizen science, for instance, right there on the bottom, awareness much higher than use. And then I'll just note one other. You can see for open access, actually, that had the highest awareness and use. And there was very little gap. So almost everyone was aware of it, and a really significant majority used open access. Okay. So moving along to just have a quick look at those broken down by research approach. So I mentioned that we asked whether respondents were quantitative or qualitative researchers or both. I've just highlighted the quantitative and qualitative here, but generally you can see that for most practices, there was higher awareness, or sorry, the higher use of open research practices in quantitative versus qualitative, not by huge amounts, but in some cases quite significant differences. For instance, like for open code and software, which makes sense, given that not all of them are particularly relevant to qualitative researchers. So you can see that quite a lot of these practices, are envisioned with quantitative in mind. But notice that for co-production in particular, use was much higher in qualitative researchers. So there are some differences there. Okay, moving on again to look at some of the attitudes that we surveyed. So in general, we found that we thought, maybe we're gonna, we step outside of our bubble, we're gonna hear, everyone hates open research and they think it's terrible. That's not what we found at all. So in general, researchers thought that open research was useful. They thought they were pretty confident they understood how to use it and what practices were relevant to them. However, there were a few of these attitudes we surveyed that had a little bit less agreement. You'll notice that less than half of the respondents thought that their institution provided all the training they needed for best practice in open research. And note that didn't mean nobody wanted training or everybody wants loads of training. It just means that they don't necessarily think that their institution is what provides it. And then right there on the bottom, you can see as well that around assessment, that very few respondents have used or have witnessed the use of open research as a criterion for promotion or hiring. So that is one area that is still lagging, if that is a benchmark we want to reach, which of course is an open question there. Okay, then moving along, we also asked respondents what would help you to use more open research practices. What would be those facilitators? And we gave them 10 options plus some various not applicable options. And they could choose up to 5. So if everybody, and everybody chose, respondents chose on average 3.7 options out of those maximum 5. So if it was all random, you would expect that everything would be at 37% on here. So yeah, we found this a kind of interesting pattern that actually, first of all, it's telling us that all of these facilitators can be pretty useful. I mean, the lowest one was 27% of respondents thought that would be useful. So they can all be useful. And there's still some patterns in there as well, where some of them look to be more popular than others. So we noted that especially facilitators around increasing the knowledge of how to do these practices, for instance, more and better guidance, ethical clarity on legal or ethical issues, being able to prioritize what are the most important practices. Those were highly subscribed, as well as some of the more practical technical things like infrastructure and having time to do it, and incentives. And notably, some of the, on the bottom, there's this kind of group of more social related facilitators around, having getting recognition for doing open research, or having peer support, or norms in the discipline. And those were ranked just a little bit lower than the other ones, although still useful. And it was interesting to note that time allocation didn't stand out as we expected. Anecdotally, you hear a lot of around open research people saying, "Oh, it's a good thing, but I don't have time to do it." And researchers are notably time poor as well, right? So we thought maybe we'd see loads of that, but it was ranked pretty equally to the others. Okay. And I'll just breeze through the last bits here. So just to note that we also looked at those facilitators by discipline, and it, as you might expect, it did differ by discipline. I'll just point out a couple here. We looked at some of the disciplines that had large numbers, so we could actually make some inferences there. But for instance, you can see in the social sciences, people especially wanted ethical clarity on how to make research open. In computing, they wanted more incentives. In biosciences, they particularly noted infrastructure would help a lot, presumably around hosting big data, things like that. So it does differ a little bit by discipline. Okay, and we also mentioned career levels. So just to note as well that the facilitators especially did vary a bit by career level. We found actually that awareness and use of practices didn't differ that much by level. More senior researchers generally were aware of and used these practices more than junior ones, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because some of those early career researchers were first-year PhD students who just maybe haven't had a chance to do any of these yet. But the trend was a little bit more interesting in looking at the facilitators. We found that it differs a bit in what types of facilitators help people. So junior level researchers needed to know what to do and need help how to do it. So they wanted more training, support from colleagues, knowledge of what to prioritize, etc. Whereas the mid and senior career researchers were more interested in having especially more time, but they don't think they need as much training or support, which is interesting to note. And sometimes they undervalue that. They don't think they need training, but practices change. Okay, so we've taken you through this whistle-stop tour of all of the quantitative elements of our survey, and I'll pass over to Lavinia now to take you through some of the qualitative analysis of some of the free text comments that our respondents gave, which has some really interesting bits in it. So over to you, Lavinia.
Thanks, Jackie. So yes, as Jackie said, our survey contained a couple of open text questions and answers, and a lot of them, most of them, focused on barriers, and our respondents and researchers used them to talk about what makes it problematic for them to engage in open research. So I divided their responses into 5 main categories. So the first one is financial barriers to open access publishing. Generally, not only for open access in the all open research practices, researchers were favorable, as we also saw from the results that Jackie shared, but highlighted different barriers. And in the case of open access, the barrier is costs, high cost of publishing and article processing charges that prevent people from engaging. So, for example, this PhD student says that the one thing that they could do would be to publish open access. However, they cannot do that because they have a certain amount of money per year to cover all costs of their research, and open access, it just can't make it. And And the other quote I have on this is someone saying that paying large sums for open access publishing is not logical, and highlights the existence of other platforms, alternative channels where it is possible to share research for free. The second theme is the need for discipline and field-specific guidance and norms. This was particularly relevant to those researchers performing qualitative research. For example, this researcher says that open research is contentious for creative writers and calls for additional, norms and guidance when it comes to creative works. And this other researcher talks about how sharing, sensitive data and material when it comes to qualitative work is not feasible or ethical without proper guidance and protocols. There is also a section here on the ethical, legal, and technological risks. So this theme was actually quite broad, and researchers talked about lots of different kinds of concerns that they have with regards to sharing open research, open data, open code, etc. And for example, this researcher also performs qualitative research says that transcripts are extremely vulnerable to inferred identification, and therefore there is a real risk involved with sharing those. Even actually when anonymized, sometimes topics of research can, and therefore sharing other material associated with them can actually be damaging. Additionally, this researcher points out that, or wonders whether actually it makes much sense to even share these kinds of information, because these kinds of transcripts are very context sensitive, and therefore taking out that context makes the sharing of the transcripts pretty useless. So, there's additional workload and ethical concerns for maybe not much benefit. Another big chunk of the risks were associated with the use of or related to AI. So this researcher says that all this cheerleading for open research is behind the time, and that we should be working to protect author copyright and copyright of our publishers rather than publishing everything openly and for free. And most of the researchers talked about AI companies and pharma companies. The fourth theme is around research environment and culture. This was also very broad, but I sort of selected all those quotes that were talking about systemic issues of the environment which researchers work. And I have this quote, which is a little longer, but it touches on lots of different aspects touched by other researchers as well. So this researcher says that I really believe open research is essential, but unfortunately in my department, it's not taken seriously. It does require time and effort, and since our PI doesn't encourage it, most of my colleagues simply don't engage with it. Sometimes I feel like I'm wasting my time trying to make my science reproducible, especially when it's not valued. At the time could otherwise be spent writing papers like many of my peers who then appear more productive. I think change needs to happen on multiple levels, and one important step would be for funding bodies to make open sharing of data and code requirement. So this researcher, as I said, highlights different aspects. So the workload, and many quotes were on this issue. I have only included this one here, but many highlighted the need for more time to engage with open research. Highlights some power imbalances when senior academics might not be on board with open research practices. The fact that it's not valued in career progression, hiring, promotion, and therefore that it puts these people who engage with open research practices at a disadvantage. And so here we see the element of competition, which again was mentioned by other respondents. When it comes to, why do I have to engage with open research practices and then lag behind compared to my peers who don't do it and focus on publishing, which is actually what is recognized by the system. This research specifically mentions funding bodies as important players in the research environment and culture, but others also talk about publishers and the roles that they can have in bettering our research environment and culture. And the last theme that I have, and coming to the end of our presentation, I fear we're probably a little bit over time, is about infrastructure and institutional support. And this, again, included lots of various aspects highlighted by researchers. This person, for example, talks about precarity as being an issue. When people leave, it's hard to keep protocols, etc., constant. The fact that open research requires financial support, whether they're coming from funding bodies, or at the institutional level, it's important to receive funding in order to make open research engagement sustainable. Other people talked about training and how that is important. Some people say even, it should be included in and that how it should be embedded early. And people mentioning, for example, that it should be part of general master's and doctoral courses. And the last quote that I have is about a mismatch between what the funders expect when they, ask for or mandate sharing, and what actually is in practice possible for researchers to do, especially in this case when it comes to complex data sets, and suggest that it would be helpful to have national infrastructure that could play a role in this rather than devolving the responsibility to individual researchers. So to conclude, we have three main points here, which is the first one is that the awareness of open research practices is mostly high, but use lags a bit behind. We have an average of 30% gap between practices being between awareness and use of practices, which varies quite a bit based on practice. So as we see, that lag is very short for very small for open access, for example. The second point is about facilitators. So all facilitators are helpful, but some are more helpful than others. For those who recognize the reference to George Orwell book. And so we didn't see one facilitator that really stood out. However, many of those that are related to how to do something really practically were favored. And the last point is with regards to that, and I would really encourage you to, if you read our survey results, to pay attention to the different needs and priorities that come with career stages, disciplines, and research approaches, because there were quite some differences in what people need in order to conduct more open research. This work was a collaborative effort, so thanks everyone who contributed, not only the people that are mentioned in the slide, but also those institutions that undertook the survey. So thank you very much. And yeah, I hope there's a little bit of time for questions if we have them.
Thank you both. That was a really engaging and thought-provoking presentation, and actually impeccable timing to the very minute. So thanks for that as well. Which does actually give us 10 minutes ish for discussion and questions. We'll have a kind of quick pause after that, so a quick comfort break before we move on to the prizes. So can I open the digital floor for questions and discussion, please? Anyone want to kick us off? If not, I can start with the question. Is there anything from the results of the survey that really surprised you or you didn't really expect?
Yeah, maybe I start. Yeah, one thing that we really thought would be that there would be a clear facilitator that would stand out, and that would be time, so a relation to time, so more time or prioritization. As Jackie said, that wasn't the case. That is not to mean that, that is not, it was not mentioned by researchers or it was not important. That's not the case at all. However, I feel that because we gave people maybe more than one choice that they could make when responding to the facilitator's question, considering how the general response that researchers think that open research is important, they did not only focus on the fact that I need more time, but also what could help them in order to engage more with it. And therefore, we see a little bit more of a spread among the facilitators that we ask them to reflect on. So I think maybe one thing could be that. Jackie, did you want to add anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think there was another there were some little things here and there that surprised us as well, and some of them may have just been kind of artifacts of our method, but we did note as well that for instance, co-production actually had a huge amount of respondents saying that they used it compared to a lot of some of the other things. So it was over half the respondents said that they were involved in co-production, which of course is kind of working with, like, say, the end users or participants of your research to help define the aims and the method from the beginning. So it sounds like it's possible. We're not sure if people maybe misunderstood a bit or thought of it as mixed it up with engagement, as in presenting your results to the public after you've done the project. But it may indicate that there's that in terms of open research practices, actually co-production is an important one to keep in mind, thinking of openness as this dialogue, this conversation between researchers and the either the participants or the end users of their research. So I like that it highlights that it's something we saw qualitative researchers tended to use more as well. So to keep in mind when we think open, not just open data or open access, it's a lot of these different practices.
Something else that just popped in my mind that I thought was a little bit surprising was when we see the results on awareness and use of recognizing contributions, where we meant in the survey we specifically mentioned, for example, use of things like credit for those who in the audience who are familiar with it. Because the results on awareness and use of recognizing contributions was quite high. And again, we're not quite sure whether it's actually a true reflection of what people do, or whether it was a bit more like taken a bit more loosely. Let's say, and researchers thought, yes, I do recognize, contributions, but what we mean is really in a more systematic way, and also involving those who are sometimes not really typically recognized. For example, sometimes technicians and even professional services colleagues. So that's what we meant, and that maybe wasn't quite understood, and therefore led to a higher numbers on that.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I can see there's a question or point from Julian. Do you want to read this out or mention it, Julian? I can turn your mic on and say it, or do you want me to read it out? Okay. Okay, I'll read it out then. Not sure you're allowed a mic. Did you do any analysis by field on use of FAIR framework for research data? So Julian's feeling is trying to engage with it is what's created an unconscious life science bias. It's very hard for very custom data sets from custom instruments to meet the R criteria in a machine readable way. Any thoughts on that?
So if I understand the question, you're asking whether we basically looked at how fair data practices are used when it comes to maybe different disciplines and different fields, and whether we have that in the survey. Yes, generally, as Jackie pointed out, it was a little bit disappointing through the spectrum. Some disciplines were more aware of it than others. However, we did not look at sort of whether, or not yet, actually, that's a good point though, whether there are already more established norms in certain fields that then aid or that would explain that reflection into it being more used. I'm not sure also, Jackie, whether you wanted to to chip in, or whether I understood that I
Sure.
responded to your question.
Yeah, I think I think it speaks to, another thing we kind of mentioned as well, that with the open research, often there many of the kind of vocal early proponents were in life sciences and medical sciences, spurred perhaps by, the effect on patients, sometimes life or death differences in whether research is made open or not. But yes, it absolutely differs by field, and we did notice. You can see. I don't know if. Well, I would suggest going to the link that we put in the chat and looking at the full report. And if you go down to the the awareness and use sections, you can see some of those differences. You could even look by field if you want to look at the specific fields. But if you look at the quantitative versus qualitative, just as a very rough overview, you see that yes, the use was, it was 40-something% in FAIR data, use in quantitative subjects, and it was, I don't know, in the teens, 15 or something in qualitative. So there's definitely some field differences there. And you can see that reflected in our data. And I encourage you to have a dig through and look if you have particular disciplines in mind. It's all out there, and we do very much welcome people having a look at it in more depth.
And
Thank
related
you.
to that, I just wanted to mention that it was quite interesting, actually, how quite the difference between awareness and use of open data compared to FAIR data, which we tend to think as, related. However, lots of researchers knew what open data was, whether they felt they could engage with it or not. Also, regardless of whether they felt they could engage with it or not, but much fewer thought that they were aware of what FAIR data is.
Yeah, when ironically, FAIR data could be kind of more inclusive than open data in some ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks both. I've got another question actually then. So thanks for sharing the report as well. How do you think these results could be best applied, I guess, in terms of by different people in different roles, but also the different institutions? That's quite a big question, but what do you see as the best way of applying these and using these?
Yes, and I imagine quite a few of the people on the call are, some of those people who might want to be applying that in their institutions. Shall I have a quick crack at that, Lavinia, and you can jump in with any more? I would say, one thing to note, a caveat is that obviously this is a survey, and it's, we think that it's kind of pretty well done, but it's still only a kind of snapshot of this one moment in time of these institutions that we've looked at. So take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt, and you probably know your institution best, but I would encourage, especially looking at the facilitators by, maybe some of those breakdowns by different areas. And I think using this as a kind of a way to understand the landscape a little bit better. And, with some of our takeaways that, in general, there's pretty good awareness of open research practices. There's room for more. There's probably some misunderstanding of many of these practices. We didn't actually test anybody to say, do you really understand what this is? It's mainly, have they heard about it? Do they think they're using it? And, what are their attitudes about it? So I would really recommend having a look through the report and just having a, think with that in mind, how can I apply this to my constituents? There seems to be room for work in kind of most of these areas, adding more facilitators, increasing some awareness of everything except open access. Everyone knows that by now. And helping to support use. Anything else, Lavinia?
Yeah, I think maybe it could even just serve, the survey itself could serve as, a sort of a vehicle to raise awareness of these practices. And I think it can give maybe some, sort of inspiration, even to early career researchers who may not have engaged with these kinds of practices, haven't had the chance to engage with these kinds of practices, to pick one or two that are more easily applicable in their discipline, and sort of discuss those maybe within their research group, or apply them by themselves. And yeah, so that's one thing. And then I think also institutionally, of course, it can be helpful with exercises like the ref to understand where we are at. There is a second iteration, it's actually a third iteration of the survey coming up next year, where we'll really then try to observe some progress in this.
Yeah, hopefully progress, but either way, change over time. Hopefully it doesn't get worse.
Thank you both. That's super helpful. And thanks again for sharing the link. And I'm sure we'll read with great interest. And it's super helpful. I think we're going to have a brief pause now. So we'll take a break until 10 past. And then we'll come back to the second session, which will be about the prizes. But thanks again, Lavinia and Jackie.
And just again, a shout out to all the other people on the team, some of whom are here today, I think, who also contributed to the work on the survey. It was really very much a team effort.
Thank you. Okay, it's 10 past. Is everybody back from their break? Yes, okay, there's a few thumbs up there. Well, welcome back. I hope you've had a chance to refresh during the break. We'll now move on to the awards section for the day. So this year, as we've already mentioned, to highlight the importance of research practices in every stage of a research career, applicants to the Open Research Prize had the choice of 3 different categories, as you can see on the slide there. One that was open to all, the general category, one that was open to early career researchers, and one that was open to research enablers. In total, 37 submissions were made across all of the categories, and 12 finalists were shortlisted for evaluation by the judging panel. We've asked the finalists to prepare a short presentation about their projects, which we'll share momentarily, and we're going to go through every category in turn. But first, I'm just going to introduce the judging panel, who will be kind of contextualizing this. So in terms of the judging panel, as we can see from the slide, the Open Research Prizes this year were judged by a panel of 6 individuals who represented all of the GW4 institutions. They possess expertise related not only to open research practices, but also to the early career and research enabler experience. So you can see the list of people here. Mr. James Thomas, data scientist at the Jean Golding Institute at the University of Bristol, and Dr. Philip Salmon, who is a professor in the Department of Physics at the University of Bath, are here as representatives of the panel, and I will hand over to them in a minute. I think first to James, who will be talking about the general prize. James?
Just finding the right button. Thanks, Dawn. So as we've said already, the general prize was open to all individuals and teams that have utilised open research practices and principles within a project or initiative. And the judges had some, thoroughly enjoyed reading all of the submissions that were made, and had a few observations on the strengths and of all the applications that we had. And we felt that submissions for the prize featured research extending well beyond academic context to practitioner-facing and applied settings. The diversity of open research methods and principles used by applicants has fostered engagement with communities and the development of active, wide-reaching and beneficial relationships. So yeah, they were all incredibly impressive. And so I think now we're going to get some presentations from the 4 people that were shortlisted.
Hannah, I believe you are first, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you. Let me just quickly do that.
So I just introduced you. So the first presentation is from Hannah de Souza.
Okay, hopefully you can see my slides okay? Yes, okay. So thank you so much for being shortlisted. We've been really excited about that, and I'm here to represent the Cardiff Baby Lab team. The submission has been led by an early career researcher in our team, Teddy Nikolov. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today to present. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Tiny Explore ecosystem, which is an open hardware and open source face detection for developmental science we developed. So young children are incredibly active in a way how they sample and select information from their environment. Anyone who ever came across a toddler would not be surprised by an astonishing amount of movement they can generate just in 10 minutes of play. And yet developmental scientists and developmental psychologists have been traditionally using quite static methods to study learning and development. We at Cardiff Baby Lab, we are very excited about everyday experiences of children, and we want to understand how to capture them better, how we can analyze them better, and how we can enable others to do the same. And this is why the Tiny Explore ecosystem was born. It's a combination of hardware and software solution. On the hardware end, we developed something called Tiny Explore Gear. You can see images of that here. It's a lightweight head-mounted camera system inspired by some of the existing solutions in the literature, but really adhering and pioneering the principles of open science. We wanted the headgear to be open source, and you can go and take a picture of this QR code to see our build manual. We want it to be easy to assemble with accessible components. You don't need to have any technical skill to build it. We put a lot of emphasis on secure data storage, so not an SD card which can be removed. We wanted something which can grow with the child. So the our headgear has this comfortable, lightweight modularity for younger babies. And then as toddlers get more active, you get a soft helmet. In exchange, it can also cater to very different sensory needs. We are capturing high quality video in very broad view, and we are then downsampling, kind of trimming the video in a vertical domain to capture hands and faces babies are seeing. We sample at the high frame rate of 50 frames per second, which allows you to remove motion blur. And we can also measure movement through using gyroscope. So the best way how to demonstrate what the headgear can actually do is to let a 17-month-old to show you what their world is like. So I'm going to cross my fingers the sound will be working for this video.
Fighter.
Finder. Can you?
Hiding! Hiding!
Oh, she was hiding. But you found her! Yay!
Car.
You found a car.
Yeah.
Good job.
Help. Help. Help.
Help, help, help. In. Ready.
Bella.
And then you want me to sing? Should I stand her up? She goes in better if she stands up. There you go.
Gone.
Bella's in the car.
Bella's
in the car.
Do, do, do,
Bella's in the car.
car.
Okay, so once you capture this amazing footage, incredibly rich on source of information with the Tiny Explorer gear, the next barrier our community is facing is what to do with all of this rich information. And this is why we developed the Tiny Explorer detection app. The first study we've done on our data set handled over 5.5 million frames. And we've been asking a question, are the children seeing faces in those frames? Where in the frames the faces are? In order to handle this volume of data, you really need to look into automated face detection. You can no longer annotate it by hand. We spent a lot of time validating existing face detection algorithms across different populations and different settings. And the ones which came as the most robust for developmental data, we integrated within the Tiny Explorer detection app. Again, several features were really important for us in terms of adhering to open science. We wanted the interface to be accessible. You don't need any programming experience to use it. You just need to be able to use this graphical interface. We selected multiple face detection algorithms to give you options. You can also set your own confidence thresholds. Everything is processed locally, so nothing is going into the cloud, which is very important when you're working with sensitive data. The build of the app is fully open and transparent. It enables scalable and reproducible research. So suddenly the volume of data we are able to handle, how much we can align as different research groups. And the app is extensible. So we're hoping to grow it. As we're validating more and more algorithms, we'll be adding them in. So at the moment, the app can handle faces, but we are hoping to add hands and objects very soon. So together, the Tiny Explorer ecosystem enabled really the labs across the world to start doing the work different way. We have users from US all across the world to Japan, and we have also early career researchers, as well as very well-positioned and established labs using the ecosystem. We think beyond research in everything we do, and the ecosystem has been hugely valuable in building materials for training practitioners, speech and language therapists, physiotherapists. We have our YouTube channel with some snapshots of children from different ages and also neurodivergent populations. We also believe the ecosystem can be way more than just a research tool. That could be a powerful tool for practitioners too. And we are doing some work in that domain. And most recently, we started collaborating with charity sector, Children in Wales, and thinking how the Tiny Explorer ecosystem could provide you with voices of these young children who are not yet able to speak. And if you want to know more about this, here is a video we co-produced together with that charity. So I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for being shortlisted. I want to thank the network, really vast network of people who enabled it, our two major funders, but particularly the families, because we couldn't do anything without them. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Hannah. That was very good. We'll now move on to a presentation by William Wadsworth.
Good afternoon. I just need to find the right screen, which should be here. So I'm William Wadsworth from the Open Flexion Microscope project. And the question here really is, wouldn't it be great if access to diagnostic microscopy was the same wherever you are in the world, whether we're in the UK or in other countries? And I'm William Wadsworth. The Open Fletcher microscope project is built around a 3D printed optical microscope, which is robotic and high performance, invented by Richard Bowman, developed by the Open Fletcher community, including the core development team, which is Richard and me and Julian and Joe, who are all together in Bath, and recently joined by Beth Probert as well from the Open Fletcher community. We're all physicists, and we never really set out to solve this problem. We were solving problems in physics and in our own labs and our own hardware needs. But the open source community and the open software and open hardware enabled the solution and the problem to come together. And the solution stems from examples like Dr. Elise here in southern Rwanda. He's a pathologist working on cancer diagnosis, taking samples from patients and looking at their samples under a microscope. But most of the time he can diagnose and treat the patient. But if he can't, that patient faces a journey for many hours up to the north of Rwanda to a different hospital. That's bad for the patient. It's also bad for Dr. Elise and for his future patients because he can't learn. He doesn't know whether there was something that he could have seen in the slides he was looking at, or whether a different biopsy or a different slide preparation would give him a new way of looking at things. What he needs is a way of taking the scans that he can do, well, taking the view from down the microscope and making a scan and being able to share that with other doctors using an automated microscopy system. He needs to be able to look at cells, but not just a few cells in a single field of view like this, but many fields of view all joined together and pictures even larger than this, scanning 10 millimeters or 20 millimeters of sample to see the whole thing and get a full view with zoomable resolution in all areas. And that's what the Open Fletcher microscope can give you. It needs to be high performance to see that individual cell detail. It needs to be robotic in order to be able to scan a slide and give the digital information, which we can then talk about between different centers. But it also needs to continue working for a long time in Dr. Elise's hospital. That means we need local maintenance, and local maintenance basically is predicated on local production as well. And that is a completely different paradigm from the current medical device manufacturing, where it's made in one country, shipped out, and the maintenance is very, very difficult in remote areas. But with open and accessible hardware, then we're able to enable this local production. What does that openness really mean in practice for an open science? Well, to use a microscope or any other open device, you need to know it exists, you need to assemble it, and you need to be able to acquire all of the parts. That's absolutely essential. If you're going to manufacture, you probably also want to know how it works. You want to influence the design, and you want to be able to talk to others about it. This is also essential. As a core team member who's not in one of those locations, if I'm going to be any help, I need to know your needs and issues. This is absolutely essential. We need the co-creation of the open development of the open hardware. And effectively, this comes down to documentation, which was mentioned in the previous talk as well. Documentation is the key to all of this accessibility. We use a software-based CAD, and that means that we can use a lot of things that have been developed for open source software with our open source hardware. But open source hardware adds another physical layer where we also need physical testing, and that is a different challenge. We need documentation of physical things, and we've actually had to develop an open source documentation program to keep track of all the different types of microscope that we have, and with all the different versions, keeping track of every single nut and bolt so we know the parts are correct. And then we need feedback. Do those parts work in all contexts, and do the instructions work in all contexts through our Open Fletcher forum? Because we're using these open source tools, we can also see who's done what. And you can see the project growing from Richard on his own back in 2015. Fairly soon after that, Paul and Grace from Tanzania joined in to the development, making sure it was properly available in those contexts. In 2021, we had quite a large team working in Bath, and then fast forwarding to the back end of last year, still developing the hardware and the software and the documentation of the project. And that's enabled many people to build it. We don't do any tracking because we don't want to as an open project, but people tell us through our forum where they have built or used a microscope, and that's extended over the last few years to more than 68 countries and locations around the world. unless that does include the sea ice in Antarctica. Something which is small and light is great for field work on the sea ice in Antarctica, in the jungle in Peru, in the fields in Argentina, in either English or Spanish, but also testing for malaria diagnosis in Tanzania, for cervical screening in Texas, for training in cervical screening. This is Daniel with his students. Well, Dr. Elise needs some training in Rwanda. Daniel could go to Rwanda and do that training, but obviously that's not scalable. If Dr. Elise has controllable robotic microscopes in Rwanda, then we can have case presentations and group learning studies, not just with Rwanda, but with Cape Verde and Brazil and Texas, and bring together that community of practice and learning. The license is open and commercializable, so we have vendors selling currently kits. The microscopes are used in healthcare facilities in Ukraine. And the WHO has recognized the open flexion microscope as an innovative healthcare technology. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, William. The next two presentations that we're going to see are both recorded, and the first one is from Kit Yates.
Hi, I'm Kit Yates, and I'm going to tell you about how I've been using open research practices during the COVID-19 pandemic through my work with the group Independent Sage, alongside my own research. So the core idea that's guiding my work was that in public health emergency, evidence is only useful if people can see it, if they can understand it, and if they can interrogate that evidence. So we treated openness as part of the research process, not just something that you do at the end. Practically, that meant taking emerging peer-reviewed findings and preprints and turning them into public-facing outputs in real time. Across the pandemic period, Independent Sage produced 62 reports and ran over 130 live briefings. My own contributions to that drew on my epidemiological and mathematical modelling expertise, particularly around vaccination strategy, shielding, and the challenges of interpreting real-time data. And the key aim throughout was to keep a clear link between what we said publicly and the underlying evidence. So to make that link usable, the accessibility of the underlying research was really important. So during the pandemic, paywalls and specialist jargon were more than just annoyances, they were literal barriers with real consequences. So I worked at least to make my papers open wherever possible through preprints, repository deposits, and where necessary, direct discussions with the publishers. And we didn't just rely on journals to do our scientific communication. The weekly live streams that we hosted were really key. They created a regular, predictable place where public, journalists, policymakers could hear the evidence that was being suggested and ask questions live in real time. And I also wrote various opinion pieces. I did multiple TV, radio appearances, interviews, translating modelling into everyday language, remembering to try to bring the audience back to the evidence base as I was going along. So a core principle that we worked to as part of Independent Sage was this idea of radical transparency by design. So in real-time crises, uncertainty is unavoidable. So the question becomes how you handle that uncertainty. And we consistently explained assumptions, highlighted what was uncertain, and compared scenarios rather than offering overly specific single number forecasts. That approach helps audiences to understand which findings are robust and which might shift as new data arrive. Reproducibility here is less about someone rerunning a full analysis and more about traceability. So we aim to leave an evidence trail that other researchers and journalists and citizens could follow if they wanted to. So our open practice is extended to research and impact because the outputs that we were trying to make accessible and traceable, they then were able to make their way into policy context across different countries and different organisations. This meant that people didn't just see the results, but that they could also verify what we were doing. Transparency made that scrutiny possible, and accessibility made our research outputs accessible for busy decision makers and analysts. For me, this has become the basis of a REF 2029 impact case study because the pathway from research to public and policy engagement is unusually clear in this case. The open outputs, the sustained public dialogue, and the demonstrable uptake. Open practices also shaped our research culture. So one thing the pandemic made obvious is that high quality public facing science relies on many different forms of labour: analysis, synthesis, visualisation, moderation and community management, not just traditional academic paper authorship. So our weekly briefings and our live question and answer required substantial preparatory collaboration. We worked together, we researched together, we backed each other up in public, and we created norms where it was acceptable to test ideas and to acknowledge uncertainty in a public domain and to correct mistakes with each other in real time. We wanted to make sure that the research methods that we had instituted during the pandemic remained reusable, because I think open research isn't just about sharing outputs, it's about sharing how you do the work. So I co-authored a Nature Protocols paper that documented our communication model, what we did, how we organised and what we learned. And we also took steps to keep that material accessible over time. I produced layman's summaries of it and aimed those at wider audiences. So I'll summarise by asking why this method of open research was important. Openness improved the speed at which we disseminated our research, but it also improved the quality, because the scrutiny it received is a form of sort of quality control. It improved equity by reducing paywalls and jargon, and it improved the work itself iteratively because the dialogue itself created feedback loops, novel questions we were receiving from the public that required clearer explanations and better framing of what the evidence can and can't say. And so looking to the future, I think that this approach is transferable. The ingredients are straightforward. You make the outputs accessible, you keep the evidence trail visible, create regular opportunities for two-way engagement, and resource the infrastructure and the roles that make openness sustainable. And that's what I'm going to try to continue to do, to build on in the future in my future research. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much to Kit. And the final presentation we have is a video recorded from Jeremy Horwood.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present our work. I'm Jeremy Horwood from the University of Bristol, and I'm delighted to share the story of Common Ambition Bristol. Common Ambition Bristol is a fully co-produced programme addressing inequities in HIV with African and Caribbean heritage communities. From the start, we designed Common Ambition Bristol as a transparent programme of implementation where community members, clinicians and researchers worked as equal partners. We began Common Ambition Bristol in 2021 with a clear challenge. There was persistent inequities in HIV prevention and testing, particularly affecting African and Caribbean heritage communities in Bristol. Now, Bristol is a high prevalence HIV city, and 28% of people living with HIV and receiving treatment in Bristol are from African and Caribbean heritage communities, even though they only make up 6% of the population. So CAB was a community-driven project with these clear aims to increase HIV knowledge, reduce HIV stigma, improve access to sexual health services, and hoping that all of these will result in an increased uptake of testing and access to PrEP, which is a pill that you can take if you're HIV negative to stop you getting HIV. Co-production runs through everything we do in Common Ambition Bristol. So we've got a project delivery group, which is made up of community members and sexual health staff, and they work to design and deliver our interventions. We've also got a project advisory group, which is made up of all our partner organisations, and they provide strategic oversight. And then we have the project evaluation group, which co-produced our research with trained community researchers. And research was vital from the start. We did observations, we did interviews, we did surveys and looked at testing data, and we iteratively fed this back to the project delivery group so improvements could be made. And crucially, community members were not symbolic. They were recognised as experts with lived experience, and powering sharing was something that went through every group in the project. So there are 4 CAB interventions. The first is multimedia, where there's lots of information online and on radio ads and on billboards about HIV and how you could get tested. The second is community outreach, and weekly our team of volunteers go to over 40 African Caribbean heritage speaking to customers around sexual health and HIV. We also have dedicated health promotion events that target particular populations, so it may be students or women talking about sexual health and HIV. And finally, we have community testing clinics in 2 locations in Bristol where you can walk in and be tested for STIs or HIV. Our evaluation has demonstrated that the CAB work has updated people's HIV knowledge, it's challenged people's misbeliefs and stigma around HIV, and it's normalised testing. And this really demonstrates the value of partnership working. These are community-led, these are designed by the community, so they are acceptable and sensitive to the community as well. And it's making testing more accessible for what is a stigmatized condition. We looked at patient record data to see if we'd had an impact on HIV testing rates. And we did modelling between April 22 and December 24 when the interventions were running. And we found that there was an estimated 1,306 additional tests amongst the African and Caribbean heritage community when compared to the non-African and Caribbean heritage community. The project has had a number of impacts. So Common Ambition Bristol has now been commissioned as part of the Sexual Health Services across Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, securing 10 years worth of funding. We've also influenced our local trust in terms of the strategies, and we've done action learning sets to teach different departments about co-production. We've also produced a co-production toolkit, which is available online and has been used nationally. And we've also won the Penner Award in 2024, and we were shortlisted for a Health Service Journal Award last year. Now I'm talking today on behalf of a very large team. We have an amazing group of volunteers and community members and clinicians that have been working on this project for over 4 years now, and everyone's really dedicated to the shared goal of reducing HIV inequities. Now, as I said, our co-production toolkit is available online, and the QR code on the left, you can download the toolkit, and that talks you through every stage of setting up and running a co-production project. On the right is the public available CAB website, which has lots of information about HIV and STIs. And please do follow us on social media. And thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to talk about Common Ambition today. Hello.
Thanks very much to Jeremy as well. So I'm sure you'll all agree by seeing that those presentations there and the judging panel were keen to emphasize that how strong all the shortlisted entries they saw were. So now it's time to announce the winner of the category. And I'm very pleased to say that the winner is the Open Flexure project team, represented by William Wadsworth of the University of Bath and consisting of Richard Bauman at the University of Glasgow, Joe Napper at the University of Glasgow, Julian Sterling of the Humanitarian Technology Trust for Microscopy for All, the Open Flexure product. So well done, William and the team.
I'm overwhelmed. Thank you very much. The other presentations were fantastic.
No, so congratulations. Right, so that concludes the general prize presentation, and I'll hand over now to Phil for the early career researcher presentation.
Yeah. Hello, thanks, James. The next category is the Open Research Prize for Early Career Researchers. It was open to individuals who consider themselves early career researchers and has demonstrated individual contributions to open research practices and principles within the research process. Some of the strengths was the category for the Early Career Research Prize was hugely competitive. The breadth and depth of the research was impressive. The submissions clearly demonstrated how open research practices have been embedded in research and how early career researchers are placing an emphasis on those practices. The alignment with open research principles inherent in the submissions greatly impressed the panel. The work of the applicants showed commitment to community-led initiatives and genuine, equitable collaborations that have led to measurable impact. So we now have several presentations for the people, for the different groups, and it's Sorcha Hamilton will be giving the first of those.
Hi, Sorry, I'm just able to share now. Thank you so much. I'll just share. Oh, I don't think I can share my slides yet.
Let me see that I can fix that. One moment. Sorry about this.
No worries, thank you.
All right, you should be able to now.
Perfect, thank you so much. Okay. So, hello everyone. So I'm Sorsha and I'm going to present some work I did on my qualitative interview study where I interviewed adolescents to find out about the lived experience of adolescent cannabis use among 16 to 17-year-olds in the UK. So obviously this is a highly sensitive research area, and because of this it comes with some extra challenges. And some of these extra challenges mainly are around the stigma of using an illicit substance, as well as concerns about confidentiality of their data. And as a researcher, trying to reach underrepresented young people can be a real challenge. So to overcome these challenges, I took 3 key approaches: youth partnership, inclusive and open recruitment, and transparent and open processes. And I'll talk you through exactly what I did. So starting with youth partnership, which is perhaps the most important one, when we think of open research, it's important to think it's not just between me and you as researchers, but rather research should be open and accessible to the public, and especially to the people that the research is for and it's about. So I partnered with youth because my study focuses on youth. So I recruited a young person advisory board, or a YPAG, and this consisted of 7 people aged between 16 to 22 years right across the UK. And I recruited these people through a social media advert campaign through Instagram and TikTok to really get voices from all across the UK. All of these young people had lived experience of regular cannabis use through their teens and all expressed a keen interest in wanting to help with this project. So what did they do? Well, they did a lot from start to finish of this project. Before it began, they helped to co-design the study, the questions, all the study materials. They helped to shape the recruitment plan and were involved in all key decision making around this. They contributed to data analysis and actually analysed anonymous transcripts themselves, and they co-authored our manuscript. To give you an impression of what kind of things are important that they co-developed, they actually co-developed our interview script. So if you look here, they actually wrote some of these questions themselves from our YPAG group, and they also, any questions I wrote, they looked over them, changed the wording, the phrasing, and the framing to make sure every question was grounded in the lived experience of young people and make sure that it was accessible and open. Another way they co-developed this study was through this very sleek TikTok campaign, which you can see the leaf emoji was used throughout. And this came from our YPAG kind of flagging that this is a code word for cannabis online for teenagers. So again, we wouldn't have known this without our YPAG. So it shows that, again, it's really open and accessible to that demographic and geared towards them. For inclusive and open recruitment, or YPAG really championed this streamlined online recruitment and participation. So starting with online sign up from TikTok, which they advised that teenagers use most, through to email confirmation and eligibility checks through online surveys, and straight through then to online participation. So this was through one-to-one interviews with myself, and this really reduced the stigma and increased confidentiality because it's a one-to-one setting that they can take part from the comfort of their own home. So it's not in a group setting, and they can take part from anywhere in the UK, especially with that reach with TikTok. So it's really open and accessible to anyone to take part. As for transparency and open processes, we uploaded the pre-registration of this study to OSF, which is still pretty rare for qualitative research, and I uploaded any non-sensitive study materials. So this included all recruitment materials, all the interview schedule, and participant-facing documents, and even emails. So everything is reproducible, and you could go on there and find and reuse our questions that were co-developed. We also wanted to be very open about how much young people helped. So this is all in the manuscript, and it will be in the publication, as well as this figure that I developed to show to make it easy to show how young people and people with lived experience can be involved in research, at what points they were involved in this research, and how they were recognised. And on that point, all young people were reimbursed £25 per hour throughout this entire project in line with NIHR guidelines, and everyone was offered co-authorship, but with full disclosure of what that meant, because obviously it's a very sensitive topic. So they were offered this decision of yes or no with full information to make an informed decision. Impact going forward, all our YPAG members have been very keen to help with other projects going forward, even or quantitative projects, to make sure that we could do lay summaries and stuff to make it accessible, because it's about them, youth. And I have also mentored other researchers at Bath to take similar approaches with people with lived experience in their own research. So thank you for listening, and I hope this talk has showed that involving people with lived experience through that process, we can make research more ethical, impactful, and inclusive, even in sensitive contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next presentation is from Just de Vries.
So hello everyone, my name is Joost de Vries and I'm a postdoc at the University of Bristol. And today I'm going to talk about how open research kind of influenced my work on classifying phytoplankton, particularly in the context of biodiversity and the ocean carbon cycle. So classifying phytoplankton, also called coccolithophores, from these calcium carbonate platelets inside their cell. And because it is very important for the carbon cycle, as you can kind of see on this very cool video on the left here, and because they produce these calcium carbonate platelets, there's a lot of interest in kind of trying to understand kind of what drives their distributions and also kind of quantifying their stocks and their production. And in addition, they're morphologically very diverse, so they're a very good tool for studying biodiversity in the ocean. However, the ocean is, of course, a very large place, which makes acquiring observations very difficult, very challenging, very expensive, which necessitates data reuse. However, previous observations can be very hard to retrieve. So in some extreme cases, this data was kind of found on floppy disks or kind of in handwritten lists in people's attics. And of course, in a lot of cases, just in things like PDF tables or just kind of strange data formats that maybe wasn't very composable with each other. So the kind of biggest and first part of this project was really to kind of compile and consolidate all this kind of data into a database that's called Cascades. And we then can publish this database in an open format, so it's available in Zenodo, was then published in an open source journal in Scientific Data, and have peer reviewed. And a big part of this was also kind of attributing all the work that kind of people put into this kind of compilation, particularly in the context of kind of retrieving this data and also quality control. So I think that's also a very important part of kind of open research. And then kind of by making this publicly available, this and also kind of enabled reuse to a much higher extent than having to email somebody for their kind of floppy disk data. And then the second part of the research was really about kind of converting abundances to carbon content, because abundances is not quite a good measure of carbon content because they vary quite a lot in size, as you can see in this picture on the left here. But this again was a lot of work, also required a lot of expert measurements. So we kind of published this in a separate database, which then really allowed us to kind of attribute the work of the people kind of actually taking these measurements, rather than kind of having one database that maybe that is not as clearly attributed to who is doing the hard work. And again, by making it open source, by publishing it in an open paper, this then really allowed reuse and also examination of the kind of methods and the code and such that we use to kind of generate these data sets. And then finally, kind of we really generated all these databases and data sets that then use these for machine learning models. But the machine learning models themselves, of course, are also not trivial, required years and years of development, a lot of debugging and such. So we also decided to actually make and package this software itself. So we made this again available. We published it in the Journal of Open Source Software as all kind of, published on the MRIT license, so people can just like take the code and use it as they want. And this then actually really allows reuse and also kind of allows reuse beyond just classifying phytoplankton to any kind of phytoplankton or even plankton group, which then is of course very valuable. And this also kind of increases confidence in their final model outputs because the code is available. People can find bugs and they can actually find and fix these very quickly, actually before even publishing the data outputs themselves. So yeah, also check that out. And again, this comes back to attribution, where of course the people writing these software are not necessarily the same people that are generating or measuring the cells in the first place. And then finally, so this kind of all this work then led to kind of a final kind of research question, research-oriented paper. But of course, the model outputs themselves are valuable beyond the initial research questions we asked in this paper. So we also just ensured that all the data and model outputs were available in their own kind of Zenodo archives. So these are then all attached to the paper. People can then reuse these downstream. So this was kind of a very brief overview, but I hope that this at least convinced you that open research practice allows a lot of kind of cool things, such as attribution of the different contributors, increased reuse of the data sets, increased transparency, kind of allowing us to capture data problems and code bugs very early before kind of publishing final papers. And I'd like to think also increased impact, one through reuse. So it's kind of already led to a lot of collaborations, a lot of citations, then also just kind of having more equitable access to knowledge, which I think also is, of course, very important context to open access research. So yeah, on that note, thank you very much.
Excellent. So we move on to our next presentation, which is from Raouf Alabshehi.
The tobacco industry is one of the most powerful and least transparent industries globally. My work focuses on making it more visible through open, reproducible, and accountable research. I'm Dr. Raouf Alabshehi from the University of Bath, working with the tobacco tactics team and beyond to counter the tobacco industry, especially the transnational ones. Before I start, just a quick conflict of interest statement that I have no financial conflict of interest. Our research group does not accept funding from tobacco companies or other commercial actors that are not aligned with public health. Information on all our funding sources are publicly available. So, the tobacco industry operates at the intersection of science, policy, and profit. It tries to influence research at different stages, from how evidence is produced to how it is used. So this creates a real challenge, especially for policymakers, because evidence is not only generated, it can also be shaped, contested, and used strategically by harmful industries. So the question becomes, can we really trust what we know? To address this question and that challenge, my work always embeds open research practices across the whole research process. This includes open design, open methods, open tools, and open dissemination. These are not separate steps, they work together as one system, and importantly, this is not theoretical. It is applied in the real world tobacco industry monitoring that we do every day. In practice, what this means is building a fully open research system. From early design stages, focusing on transparency from the start with clear rules, open data sources, and structured review processes. These review processes included a process that I introduced, including senior review system to every new publication on our website. And it also includes team authorship approach, which strengthens accountability and recognizes contributions even beyond academia. In terms of methods, I prioritize reproducibility by publishing detailed methodologies in peer-reviewed publications and running hybrid training program that supports researchers globally, especially in low middle income countries, to apply similar approaches in their own work. And for tools, I make underlying materials openly available, including analytical codes like this 24 pages code that I screenshotted here, and the nearly 1,000 Freedom of Information requests and responses published under my name. This allows others to verify, reuse, and build on my research. And in dissemination, the aim is to go beyond academic publishing, beyond peer-reviewed publications, to reach out broader community and stakeholders. Most notably through our tobaccotactics.org, the website that I manage, a platform that translates research into accessible information on the tobacco industry for policymakers, journalists, and civil society. However, what matters is what this enables in practice. And what this work enabled in practice is high impact at different levels. It has supported policy discussions, informed media investigations, and helped improve public understanding of the tobacco industry and their dirty tactics. The approaches I have developed are also being used and adapted in different country contexts. So openness here is not just about transparency, it's what allows this work to be trusted, used, and scaled. Overall, this work shows that open research is not just a principle, it is a practical tool for accountability. And in the context of the tobacco industry and countering it, that accountability is essential for protecting public health. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presentation will be by Claire Rees-Zimmerman.
Hello, my name is Claire, and I'm going to tell you about my work making a method to measure particle interactions reproducible by design. This is work that I began as a junior research fellow at the University of Oxford, and I'm continuing in collaboration from the University of Bath. So to begin with, why measure particle interactions? Well, many everyday materials, from fertilizers to medicines and toothpaste, depend on how particles interact in liquid. However, it is difficult to measure these interactions directly, so industries often rely on approximations rather than measurements. My work focuses on making these interactions measurable and, importantly, making these measurement methods reproducible and usable by others. If we can measure these interactions, then we can better understand the systems and begin to control them, including preventing clumping or separation and optimizing industrial processes. I will briefly explain how our inverse method works. From microscopy, we can track particle positions, effectively measuring structure. The inverse method takes this structural information and infers how the particles are interacting. We call it an inverse method as instead of directly measuring the interactions, we are extracting the interactions from what we can observe. The result we get, as shown on this example graph, is the interaction between particles as a function of distance. On this slide, I'm going to outline how I've made the method reproducible by design. So in this first paper, published in JSIS Open, I explain in detail how the inverse method works, including example code, which is explained. The paper starts by validating the method on simulated data, and then it goes on to apply it to example experimental data. Past students in the group are included as authors, as I incorporated their code and theses in the paper, so this recognizes their contribution. This second paper compares our inverse method with traditional and machine learning methods. So this paper then acts as a guide to when each inverse method should be used. It also shows our method to be particularly efficient and accurate. In order to make the method easily reusable, I've shared the code on GitHub, along with example data on which the code can be tried out. As a result of these efforts, we've already started to see uptake of the method. Starting with close to home, the documentation makes it easy to train future group members. We're working with the agrochemicals company Syngenta to apply the method to their formulations. I also undertook a visit to the Francis Crick Institute, the microscopy group to share the method. The paper on the previous slide, benchmarking methods, was done in collaboration with groups in Madrid and Durham. Also with the group in Madrid, we've applied the method to non-equilibrium systems. We're also working with people in Eindhoven to apply to systems also containing polymers. To help disseminate the method, I presented it at international conferences and seminars. I helped a group in ETH get the method working on their experimental data. A group in Germany have built on the method, and various other groups have got in touch to say they're trying out the method. So what's next? I'm working on extending the method to more complex systems, including mixtures and directional interactions, such as in this image, releasing faster, more efficient implementations of the method, continuing open sharing of the code and data as we make these developments, and we hope to see expanding use in real-world and industrial applications. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. So this brings us to our last presentation, which is from Milatala Kassim.
Hi, my name is Mena. I am an architecture researcher and educator. My project is titled Designing with Not For Open Research as an Ethical Practice, and I'm going to take you through it using the concept of ripples of change. At the center of everything I do is one principle. Research should be done with people, not on them. I believe that research does not belong on library shelves. It belongs in the environments where it can make real change. This is why my dissemination work focuses more on public-facing outputs than conventional academic publication. Not because I do not value scholarships, but because if the people who shaped my research can't access it, then I have failed them. For me, this is an ethical commitment. Disabled people are not my subjects. They are my co-researchers, co-authors, and co-designers. Everything you are about to see rippled out from that belief.